Chapter 15. The Forged Letter. In direct contradiction to the note which Robert received, Mr. Ellerton bent his steps toward the Glenben house, where, despite the crowd of visitors, he had managed to obtain rooms. He sought in vain for his son among the throng that poured out from the institute. He then found one of the professors and asked him to send Robert to him, if he should find him. The professor had politely told him that he would send to his boarding place, and inform him of his father's arrival, which he did, and with what success future chapters will show. Thanking him for his kindness, Mr. Ellerton then returned to the hotel, where he waited with ill-disguised impatience for Robert's appearance. At the dinner table Madame Alroyd and Dora sat directly opposite Mr. Ellerton, and as his eyes fell upon the graceful and familiar beauty of our heroine, he started violently, and during the whole meal intently studied her features. Dora had recognized him at a glance, and all her old anger toward him revived instantly. For she could not forget how bitterly he had opposed Robert's love for her, nor the sarcastic insinuations he had cast at her mother. She wondered why Robert was not with his father, if they had seen each other at all. She wondered also if he had fully forgiven his father for his former harshness and ill-treatment, and if Mr. Ellerton was as cross and unyielding as ever. She glanced up furtively at him, as her thoughts reached this crisis, and caught his eye fastened earnestly and thoughtfully upon her. Her own dropped instantly, and with almost a guilty feeling, for she felt as if he must have read her thoughts, so searching had been his glance. She thanked the fates fervently that just at this moment her aunt finished her meal, and arose to leave the table. She felt that a pair of eyes were following her the whole length of the room, and she was ill at ease until the door closed upon them. "Who were those two ladies who just left the room?" asked Mr. Ellerton of a gentleman who sat at his right hand, and with whom he had been having some previous conversation. "Madame Alroyd and Miss Dora Dupont, her niece." "They are from your own country, sir, I have been told," replied his companion. Mr. Ellerton puckered up his mouth very much as if he were going to whistle, while he muttered to himself, "Well, I don't wonder the little beauty looked at me, as if she thought I was an old bear. She must have known me, and now I know where I have seen those great, deep blue eyes before." "Do you know anything about them?" he asked, aloud. "Only by report," replied his neighbor. "That says that the old lady is as rich as Croesus, and has adopted the young lady who is her niece. They are making a tour for pleasure of this country. They say the little beauty is turning all the young men crazy." "Is she? That's a pity, for I have my doubts about any of them getting her," remarked Mr. Ellerton, dryly. "I don't know about that. I sat beside her today in the institute, and I began to think that one young man had turned her head, for she scarce breathed all through Ellerton's valedictory, and when he finished she threw him a lovely bouquet, and which you might have seen in his hand afterward. She's a dainty little craft, anyhow, don't you think so?" Well, yes, rather," replied Mr. Ellerton, smiling at his companion's volubility, and rather enjoying this bit of gossip about his son. Then to himself he added, "I guess I shall have to look into this matter a little. Rich, is she? Well, I won't mind so much about his having her now. I'll cultivate their acquaintance immediately, and try to get the little one to like me if I can." With which complacent reflections he arose and left the table. As Madame Alroyd and Dora were passing up the stairs to 97 their rooms, a servant met them and handed the latter a note. She glanced at the handwriting, and in an instant flushed crimson, then turned pale as the pure lilies which hung from her hair, and lay against her soft cheek. Passing swiftly to her room, with the note clasped in both her hands over her beating heart, she sank breathless upon a sofa, quivering in every nerve. The writing was Robert's, and she felt that that white-folded missive had power to seal her happiness or plunge her into the depths of woe. Madame Alroyd took in at a glance the cause of her emotion, and so remained silent until her niece should recover herself sufficiently to read the note. She had not long to wait, for soon Dora tore it eagerly open and read it through, her white face blanching to the hue of death, until at the last word she fell with a moan of anguish to the floor. Her aunt sprang quickly to her side, and, seizing the fatal missive, flashed her eyes swiftly over it, for she felt she had a perfect right to know its contents. "Dastard! Cowardly villain!" burst fiercely from her firmly compressed lips at its close. Then ringing a furious peal for her maid, she gathered the unconscious girl tenderly in her arms, and moaned, "My poor stricken lamb, it is cruel, cruel to crush your young heart thus." The maid came in, and together they raised her and laid her gently upon a sofa, and applied restoratives. Could Ralph Moulton have seen her then, methinks even his cruel heart would have failed him at the sight of that white, rigid face, and he would have been glad to give the lovers back to each other to have seen those lovely eyes again unclose, and that breathless bosom heave again. His diabolical plan had worked well, for the note ran thus: "Dora. For I cannot say my dear Dora, I feel as if I have forfeited all right to name you thus. Your note, so deftly concealed in your lovely tribute today, causes me more suffering than I like to own, for it shows me how fully and faithfully you have trusted in me all these years, when well, I thought when I last saw you, that I, too, should be true, and that nothing could ever change my affection for you. But how changeable is life! I will be frank with you, however, and trust to your kindness of heart to release me from all bonds that have united us in the past. I have recently met a young and lovely maiden, without whom life to me would be utterly wretched. Could you see her, you would not blame me that I wish to wed her. And now I have one request to make, and then I bid you farewell forever, and hope that you may yet attain earth's highest happiness. Will you consent that the bonds which unite us be annulled? I feel that I have not the courage to meet you, and when you receive this I shall be far away. I have written to my father the cause of my absence. And if you will sign the paper which he will present you, you will render deeply grateful one who has done you great wrong, and who earnestly wishes to be forgiven. Yours, with deep repentance, Robert Ellerton. For an hour Dora lay in a fearful swoon, and Madame Alroyd was nearly distracted with the fear that her darling would die. She showered the bitterest reproaches her heart could invent upon the author of all this sorrow and suffering. She blamed herself again and again for being overpersuaded to come to that horrible place. But Dora's health was good, and her constitution firm and strong, and she finally opened her eyes and gazed wildly upon her aunt and maid, who hung so anxiously over her. At first she could not realize why she was lying upon the sofa, so weak and languid, but presently the remembrance came to her, and she closed her eyes again wearily, with a low, helpless moan. "There, darling, you are better now, drink this, and it will give you new strength," said her aunt, putting some wine to her lips. She obeyed, and the color soon began to tinge her pale lips again. Madame Alroyd bent tenderly over her and pressed a kiss upon her pure brow. "Have courage, my precious pet," she whispered. "Show your brave little heart now. You are all that poor old auntie has got, and must try and live for her. Do you know, did you read?" she gasped, a look of stony agony in her deep eyes. "Yes, love, I knew I might, and, oh, darling, this poor old withered heart has suffered, too. I know how it feels, and the sting is there yet. The thorn is left, if the rose is faded and dead." And poor, sympathizing Madame Alroyd took the pale, crushed lily in her arms, and sobbed as if the sweetness of her own life had been just crushed out, instead of years and years ago. And Dora cried, too. The tears came like a flood, and they did her good, though she felt as if life held no joy for her now. But she would live as happily as she could for her dear aunt's sake, who had made her life so happy the past 6 years. She passed her night of sorrow alone, and when morning came she rose up calm and proud, and pale and cold as an iceberg. Not another tear did Madame Alroyd see, not another sob did she hear. Dora's heart might have been impregnable marble, after that first wild burst of sorrow, for any outward appearance of grief. No queen could have borne herself more proudly and coldly at the offense of some criminal than did Dora DuPont after she believed that she was forsaken, and her aunt, being a woman of the world, exulted at the spirit she showed, while in her secret heart she wondered at her powers of endurance.